morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the places at Hawk Blogger. And it is a very adventurous Monday morning. I hope all of you are doing well, enjoying whatever weather you're getting. We certainly are getting a lot of snow out here. And sorry, it took a little longer than expected to get on this morning. My youngest son had gotten pretty used to the idea that there wasn't going to be school today and that the 2-hour delay was going to be an all-day delay. And when it turned out that that changed, he wasn't too fond of the idea of going to school. So my wife and I had to do our tag team, but he is now off to school, which is great for him, great for us. And we can now talk about all the news about the Seattle Seahawks, of which there's plenty, and there's actually news around the NFL as well. So we will cover all that. Obviously, the Seahawks reportedly made 2 coaching decisions. I'll talk to you about that in a second. One of the best, if not the best, defensive player in the entire NFL has requested to be traded. We will talk about that and what, if any, implications there are for your Seattle Seahawks. And who knows? There might be some other things that happen between now and when this show finishes. So do me a favor, give the show a like, click subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciate it. It's a great way for other people to find this awesome community that you're all helping us build here of just really smart, kind, passionate Seahawks fans who just want to talk ball every single day. And we've already got some super chats. So we've got Corey Hickok, who's been a member for 10 months. He's one of the originals, the OGs. Getting a rare chance to catch a show live, and just want to thank you, Brian, for all your hard work and awesome Seahawks content. As a longtime Patreon supporter, it's amazing to see what you've grown this into. That is incredibly kind of you, Corey, and I really appreciate you supporting in all the ways that you do. And I'm glad that you can catch the show live, participate, because honestly, that's the best way to do it. The chat's always awesome. A lot of great folks in there. And then Bryce Coots has already done it. His 10 Hawk Blogger memberships. I don't know how many days in a row he has done 10 Hawk Blogger memberships. Bryce, you got to keep track for us. It's remarkable at this point what you're doing to help grow the channel. Just really, really appreciate it. And make sure you check out Bryce's show as well. I think it's Hawk Zone, if I remember right. And Bryce does a great job over there. So make sure you check out his channel as well if you want even more Seahawks content. And of course you do. So consider doing that. I see someone saying that they want a trial membership. If you want to get a trial membership, all you got to do is turn on memberships on your specific account in order to be able to be gifted a free membership. And you got to be able to actually engage with the show, watch the show, like the show, subscribe. The more that you watch, the better your chances are of getting one of these, dozens, if not hundreds of free memberships that are out there. In fact, Chris Clark just gave away another 5 free Hawk Blogger memberships. So a lot are out there. All you got to do is engage with the show. And Bryce says that his show is the Hawk Zone Rundown. So make sure you check out the Hawk Zone Rundown. All right. So let's start with the Seahawks news. And I think that's probably most pertinent. And we've been waiting for this for a while. Klint Kubiak was hired a while ago. And the question was, were we going to get all these coaching announcements last week? I see that there's a question from Tasha about the snow cam. I thought about putting the snow cam up, ended up not doing it, but I'm glad that you guys appreciated that yesterday. But what happened was Klint Kubiak did not go to the Senior Bowl. He spent that week in New Orleans, most likely figuring out what is going on with his staff and making some decisions about who's going to stay with the Seahawks staff. And, at the end of the day, ended up deciding to bring over a couple of his holdouts from, people that he's worked with before with the Saints to be a Seahawks coach now. So he has brought over John Benton to be his offensive line coach. I've got some sound from John Benton I'm going to play that I think you guys will like. I think we learn a little bit about his philosophy. I actually have already now learned, I feel like, a little bit more about him and what to expect from him in listening to that bit. So I'll play that for you here in just a second. And then the other is he has hired Andrew Janocko as his quarterbacks coach, and they go back a ways. So I'll play some sound for you from Andrew Janocko as well coming up here in a little bit. And we'll see what implications this potentially could have to who the Seahawks are going to draft, who they're going to acquire, all those kinds of things. Now, I know people like the snow cam. I'm going to see if I can get that set up on the fly. A little bit crazy to do this. Gonna try. Oops. And let me get this set up, and I will add it to the show here in just a second. Oops, that is way off. Sorry, folks. I'm doing this for the snow lovers. I think it's going to be worth it at the end, but let me see if I can get this squared away. And let me see if I add this in. And we go to this view. You get a little bit of a snow view there. Gonna try to go. There we go. That's a little bit better. A little bit off center. There you go. But now you should hopefully be able to see the snow falling outside. So there you go. There you go. You got your snow cam. I did it for you. I managed to get it done without hopefully causing too much craziness in the feed. All right. So let's talk first about John Benton. Who is John Benton? I think the best way to start hearing about John Benton is to hear from John Benton. So this is an interview he did in May of last year when he was hired as the New Orleans Saints offensive line coach. So you were going to hear, this is about 4 minutes long, so I'm going to be on while you're going to be hearing it but not seeing him. Here is the John Benton interview.
Good offensive linemen are good offensive linemen, and but truth, two equal, you'll go for the more athletic. You do run more. It's less of.
Let's try that again. Make sure that plays.
Good offensive linemen are good offensive linemen, and but two equal, you'll go for the more athletic. You do run more. It's less of, for lack of a better term, less of the traditional, get in there and grind it out and power steps and talking about that. And what we do is we run off the ball. We try and beat defenders to spots on the field and stop pursuit. So we do a lot of things that are on the more athletic side of things as opposed to just finding out if we're bigger and tougher, I guess, so to speak.
I would imagine Fuanga fits that vision pretty well then, or
who does?
Talise Fuanga.
Oh my God, yes. Yes, he fits it real well. I tell you, I think the group is, as a whole, is good, but obviously Tally fits the scheme incredibly well. He ran a very similar scheme. I've known his line coach from college for years, and we've conversed back and forth. They're doing a lot of the same things, so he's got some familiarity with it, and obviously an incredible athlete. So very excited about Tally.
Yeah, John, I'm going to apologize if you already answered this, but it sounds like you kind of answered it. What's going to your philosophy with this offensive line?
Philosophy as a whole, kind of what I was saying before is, as opposed to just being strong and physical and trying to knock them off the ball, which obviously I hope we do, the emphasis is really on cutting off pursuit, winning angles against the defense and that type of thing. So we take a more athletic approach from that standpoint. And those are the kind of principles we're trying to do now.
Do you feel you have those type players on this roster?
I do. I think the talent is there. I was another lack of a better term, I was drooling over Eric McCoy when he was coming out in the draft. I'm very excited to be with him. Caesar, I could say the same thing, and then, Trevor's a great, we have some athletes that are more than capable of what we need to do. And a lot of times it's just a little different in mindset that we get that instilled in them. I think we'll be successful.
I know it's early. I know a lot of the emphasis is going to be on Trevor Penning, but what have you seen from Trevor so far?
Everything's very positive so far. I think, as I said, I think he's experienced, from what I've heard anyway, he's experienced some bad luck. Just the fact that we're 18 days into it, and he's been at every practice, every training session, is healthy, feels good. I thought he looked good today. I think all arrows are up on Trevor right now, and just keep that going.
John, I'm sure this is a repeat as well, but Fuaga plays right tackle all through college. Trevor's played left tackle his whole life, and you guys flip-flop them.
What are we
what's
thinking?
What's the philosophy behind that? Yeah.
Well, really, it all started before we knew we had Fuaga.
Yeah.
We just really felt like Trevor, from his experience and whatnot, needed a fresh start. And I'm really of the belief there's not that much difference between right and left tackle. So, and with Ramczyk probably being an injury casualty, let's move Trevor over there. And then Tally has had experience at left tackle, and definitely is the athlete to do it over there. So, just decided to stay with it after the draft, and I think it's been. We won't know, but it looks good so far. I think they're both responded well.
Why do you think it's not that big of a?
Well, I think it used to be. It used to go through the season, and the best pass rushers were always on our left, and that's not true anymore. Defense has got smart, and it's maybe not 50-50, but close to it. We're a very ambidextrous offense from a run game standpoint. You used to put your big slobber knocker at right tackle and your athletic guy at left tackle, but we're going to go both directions and be athletic. So I really don't, the characteristics we need for both tackles are essentially the same.
So if you were just coming in for the middle of that, that is John Benton, your new Seahawks offensive line coach. And that was an interview he did when he joined the Saints during OTAs, actually, back in May of 2024. And if you guys listened to that, hopefully you did, 4 minutes long, there was a lot of pretty pertinent information in there. What are the things that stood out to me about John Benton in that interview? There's at least 3. One, he's interested in athletic guys, not necessarily just knocking people off the ball. Obviously, he wants them to be able to do that, but he doesn't want to count on that. He wants offensive linemen that are going to beat people to a spot and set up angles. What does that sound like? That sounds like zone blocking. That is the whole concept of zone blocking, is getting to a specific spot before somebody else, creating angles for your back, creating angles for your running game and your linemen. So athleticism, he talked about being athletic. That was his focus. So I'll talk about the implications of that in a second, because I think there's good and potentially bad, but that's clearly his philosophy and matches up with what I think we've heard from, about Klint Kubiak and his father and others that have run that kind of offense. The other thing we heard from him was that, he doesn't necessarily think that it matters as much which tackle position you're in. So they have Talisi Fuaga, who they drafted very early last year. They had another player, who I think Trevor Penning, who's been on one side. They kind of flopped it back and forth. And he feels like it used to be a situation where you wanted, his slobber knocker was his term, right? We've all heard that. On your right tackle, the big heavy guy, the big strong guy, and then your left tackle was your more athletic guy. Now they want to be able, what did he say? We're ambidextrous. We want to be able to run to either side. We want athleticism at both tackles to be able to get out and do well in the run game. So I think that's a really interesting insight into how he thinks about offensive line play and in terms of personnel. What else did we hear? We heard that he thinks that they both have to be able to like the pass rushers are coming from both sides. So it's not just being able to be athletic and get out in the run game. It's also about, you know, these guys both have to be able to hold up to primary edge rushers from his perspective. So he sees the tackle positions as somewhat interchangeable, which is interesting. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but I'm not the offensive line coach, so it doesn't matter necessarily what I think. But interesting to hear from him about that. I think it's also worth kind of commenting and being aware of, like, Talisi Fuaga is one of the most physical, you know, offensive linemen to come out last year. The fact that he's a good fit for what they want to do, you know, that's great. Now, I pause a little bit there because, you know, John Benton was hired last year. So I'd have to go back and look at the exact timing, but this could have been just like the Seahawks offseason last year where, you know, decisions were getting made without the coaches being fully involved and integrated quite yet. So who knows? But he did say that he knew Fuaga's offensive line coach at Oregon State for many years, and so he feels like that's a good match, or was a good match for them. So I thought there was a lot there that was particularly interesting about John Benton. What do I take away from that as potential implications for the Seahawks? Well, there's a few things. Who do I think makes sense in what we just heard about? Well, Charles Cross is pretty much an ideal left tackle for a tackle in general for his own scheme. Super athletic, a little bit smaller, quick off the ball. Like he is really well suited for that. I think it's also something to watch out for Christian Haynes. Now, why would I bring up Christian Haynes of all people? Well, believe it or not, Christian Haynes was one of the highest graded zone blocking run blocking linemen on the Seahawks last year. I think it's also interesting that Christian Haynes is one of the people that tweeted out, if you remember when Klint Kubiak got hired, you know, kind of an explosion emoji, like he was excited about it. You know, it may be that this is a scheme that fits him relatively well. If you remember some of the film from Christian in college at UConn, a lot of the film that evaluators fell in love with was him, you know, on the edge, moving, like targeting people on the move in run blocking and really finishing. So a lot of those cases from my recollection was pulling, which is not necessarily zone scheme related. But, you know, this may be something that fits him particularly well, and, you know, it'll give him an opportunity to hopefully grow in his second season. Now, this is interesting. If I were to tell you, like Anthony Bradford, if I was to ask you, was he a better zone blocking, better graded at zone blocking or gap scheme? This is a guy that's like 350 pounds. You generally would think he's a better gap scheme guy. He had a higher grade than Christian Haynes as a zone blocker last year, a 67.8 grade. He was relatively the same as Christian Haynes, but both were better than like Laken Tomlinson as, you know, a zone blocker. But that was interesting. Abe Lucas is a guy that I think a lot of people would assume, okay, this guy is the big, strong right tackle. He also was playing coming off his injury. He even said he was on a flat tire last year as he still is recovering from his surgery. He was a higher graded zone blocking, run blocking right tackle than he was gap. So, of course, these are just PFF grades for these different things. That is, we all know that is not the end all be all. But it is kind of an indicator, at least some signal one way or another, which these guys are better at. You know, the best zone blocker, ironically, on the Seahawks offensive line last year, Connor Williams at center. He was a guy that had a 75.8 grade as a zone blocker. That was what he excelled at in Miami. Really known for being able to get out and really block on the move. now that he's retired, Olu Oluwatimi was a full 10 points less in terms of his grade. He was a 64.5 graded zone blocker, but Olu also has some pretty good college film of him blocking out on the move. So, not exactly sure what that will mean for Olu. Also not exactly sure what that will mean for Jalen Sundell, but I do think it has implications for guys that they would potentially look at in draft classes. And Gray Zabel, who is the guy that, obviously highlighted last week, and everybody else is now highlighted as well. He is an ideal fit for a zone blocking scheme. And interestingly, if you didn't know, he has history with someone else that's on the Seahawks already. Jalen Sundell, the rookie undrafted free agent center for the Seahawks last year, also played at North Dakota State last year, or the year before, I should say. So there's some familiarity with that group, and I'm guessing that John Schneider's been watching Gray Zabel for more than just this year, given that he plucked Jalen Sundell off of that roster last year. So I think Gray Zabel becomes just, again, a really obvious fit. Now, a guy that I have some question about, Sataoa Lamea. I thought Sataoa Lamea really came to life as a gap scheme blocker. I thought his double teams were excellent. I thought he got up to the second level really well. I thought he was at his best when he was blocking and moving north and south as opposed to east and west. Now, we didn't see as much zone blocking in the latter half of the year, so maybe that was just it. But I do I'm pretty high on Sataoa Lamea. I really liked what I saw. I really liked what I saw in the gap scheme last year. So I assume they're going to run both regardless, but this could have some real implications on who's a logical fit. Now, the other thing here is, you look at free agency. Trey Smith is an ideal fit. Now, he's an ideal fit almost anywhere you want to go, but he's a great fit in that regard. If I go down and let me do this real quick. I am going to let's pull up Trey Smith for a second. And let me pull up the Eagles for a second. And, Trey Smith, one of the highest graded zone blocking guards in the NFL. You know who's right behind him? So Trey Smith had an 81.5 grade as a zone blocker. Mekhi Becton was 78.7. Now, you wouldn't think a 370-pound, 6'7" right guard would be an ideal zone blocker, but he seemed to do pretty darn well in that scheme last year. So, or this year, we should say. So, yeah, I mean, both those guys seem to still be potentially good fits for, a zone scheme. So those were some of the things that kind of jumped out to me about John Benton. I think it's worth taking a second just to also talk about his career history. So he's been coaching forever, started in 87. He was an offensive line coach pretty much the whole time. So 95 was really when he started as a coach for Colorado State. He did that until 2002 when he was hired to become the St. Louis Rams offensive line coach in 2003, and did that for a couple years before becoming the Houston Texans offensive line coach under Gary Kubiak, 2006 to 2013. Then he was the Dolphins offensive line coach from 2014 to 2015, was the assistant offensive line coach for the Jags in 2016, was with Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers from 2017 to 2020. Really want to go back and look a little bit at those teams. With the Jets 2021 to 2022. So I'm guessing maybe he went with Saleh. I'll have to go back and double check that. Has been out of the game for a couple of years and then got brought back by Klint Kubiak last year to coach with the Saints, and now joins the Seahawks as their offensive line coach. If it's not already obvious, this also means that Scott Huff will not be back with the Seahawks. If you didn't see it earlier this week as well, or this weekend. Ryan Grubb has taken the job under Kalen DeBoer to be the University of Alabama offensive coordinator. You'd have to assume Scott Huff is either going to head back there. Maybe he'll go to University of Washington again. One of those two is probably the most likely. And we'll see what happens with Scott Huff. I really enjoyed covering Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff and wish them both the best. But John Benton now joins as the Seahawks' new offensive line coach. So, yeah, let's take 1 second and look at that 49ers crew from 2017 to 2020. So let's rewind back in time, get in the time machine, and refresh our memories about who were the offensive linemen for that group. So let me look at roster there. This was Joe Staley, Laken Tomlinson. So yes, that's one of the things I was wondering about. He has experience with Laken Tomlinson. By the way, if you're wondering, and you might cringe at this, Laken Tomlinson, he had a Pro Bowl year the year after John Benton left. So his Pro Bowl year was not during John Benton's time, but it was after. If I go and I check what were Laken Tomlinson's grades back with John Benton, we can see that he, pretty much the same, 66 overall, 67, 68. He did improve kind of each year. He had some good run blocking years there, but had his best year the year after. Was generally a better pass blocker than a run blocker until the year after. So I'm kind of curious about what happened there. Other guys, so Joe Staley, Laken Thompson, Daniel Kilgore was their initial center, Brandon Fusco, and then Trent Brown. So that's an interesting crew. How did it change the next year? Weston Richburg became their center. Mike McGlinchey was drafted. Michael Person was part of that crew. Let's see if we can get a little bit more. Gary Gilliam, remember that name. But that's interesting. And then if we go to 2019, Justin School, is that really who was there? No, Joe Staley was their left tackle still. I think maybe he missed some time. And Daniel Brunskill was still there. And then 2020, the final year, that is when they got Trent Williams. Ben Garland was their center, it looks like. Well, let me double check that. Who was their center? Yeah, it looks like it was split between Ben Garland and Harrison Grasu. And then Brunskill was their guard and McGlinchey was their right tackle. So interesting. I don't know if there's a lot to pull from that. I am curious what it's going to mean for the potential of Laken Tomlinson. I'm one of the few people that is a proponent of bringing Laken Tomlinson back, not as a starter, though. I think Laken Tomlinson would be an ideal veteran backup at guard, especially if he knows John Benton's system. But I think that they've got to try to upgrade that spot in general. All right, so other things, I think that's it with Benton. The other hire, and I want to play some sound for you on this as well, is Andrew Janocko. So before I get into that, I will share with you kind of Andrew Janocko's background. He has interestingly he's hired to be the Seahawks quarterbacks coach. That's what he did with the Saints last year. He actually has some background as a offensive line coach. So he was the Vikings assistant offensive line coach in 2017, the co-offensive line coach in 18, back to the assistant offensive line coach in 19. Then he was the wide receivers coach in 2020, and then he became the quarterbacks coach for the first time in 2021 when Klint Kubiak got his first shot as an OC, stepping in for his dad as the offensive coordinator for the Vikings. They elevated Andrew Janocko at the same time. I wanted to play for you a sound from Mr. Janocko. He was asked about what's the benefit or advantages of having been a receivers coach and then moving into the quarterback's room. Here is what he said.
Well, I think it's the familiarity with the position, but also the familiarity with the person and understanding, what they like to do with their releases and expecting them to be in a certain window. So you're on time with your progression, but understanding how they're put together and how they get to that spot. I think that'll be beneficial going forward, where we can use some of those advantages of bringing even more familiarity to that room.
So that was Andrew Janocko talking about the benefits of having been a receivers coach and then moving into the quarterback's room. And he's kind of focusing on there the notion of helping the quarterbacks understand how the receivers are going to get to their spots on the field, when certain windows will open and be available to them. And I think that also speaks to the fact that this is a timing-based system, right? Like there's going to be a lot of things moving horizontally and a lot of misdirection, which I always appreciate because it puts defenders in conflict. They have to make decisions. They have to really be accurate with their eyes about what they're trusting to see and react to. And what that means is that there's going to be moments where the guy's going to be open and you have to run. You have to be at a particular spot at a particular time. It's a very detail-oriented offense. Detail. Hats off to you if you're out there. But it's going to matter that the Seahawks they're not just going to be dropping back and looking for someone to uncover. They're going to be getting to spots at specific times, and the ball is going to have to be delivered at specific points. And honestly, Geno Smith's a very good quarterback for that kind of system, and I think would benefit from coaching, having players coach to be in their spots at the right time. What will that mean for DK Metcalf? Can he actually be in the right window at the right time? Can this be finally an offense where we can see DK Metcalf catch a crossing pattern and take it to the house because he's got the speed to do that. He's got the physicality to do that. But a lot of times we just see these vertical routes with DK Metcalf. And I think we will see more angled routes, more crossing routes in this kind of system. And I think that's going to be a good thing for the Seahawks. I think it's going to be a good thing for DK Metcalf and a good thing for Geno Smith, quite honestly. Let's check on some super chats while we're here. Chris Clark has been a member for 9 months. He says, thank you, Brian, for all that you do. Well, appreciate that, Chris. That's very nice of you to use your super chat on that. Thank you. And then Bryce Coots, back at it again. A huge super chat. So generous. Says, thank you so much for the shout out, Brian. The Real Hawk Talk and yourself was my inspiration to start my own Seahawks show. Thanks for all your work you do covering the team and providing with the highest level of content. Well, I can't claim to be the highest level of content. That is very nice of you, Bryce, and thank you so much for your generosity. I'm trying to hit a quality and quantity bar. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it's nice when the Seahawks give us something to talk about for sure. So, what's left? What is left for the Seahawks from a coaching perspective? Let's go through the list. I'm gonna pull up the Seahawks coaching staff, and we know Klint Kubiak's up there. I think Mac Brown I would bet he's safe as a tight ends coach. They love Mac Brown in that building. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's safe. If we go continuing down the list, Scott Huff, we talked about. I think it seems likely that Scott Huff will move on. There is some chance. I don't think it's likely, but maybe there's a small, tiny chance that Scott Huff will want to be an assistant offensive line coach to John Benton, who has a lot of experience. Probably not, but maybe. I think the other guy that's going to be interesting to find out about, Brendan Nugent, who was the assistant offensive line coach last year, had been the offensive line coach for the Chargers prior. Does he stick around? Because they still need an assistant offensive line coach. Don't know what will happen with John Benton and who he will or won't bring in. Frisman Jackson, the receivers coach. I'm really curious about this. The Saints had a receivers coach who was coaching at the Senior Bowl. And actually, he was not. He was getting to act as the receivers coach. Let me pull up the Saints roster of coaches. So Keith Williams was the Saints receivers coach. Let me see if there's any news on Keith Williams as of now. From what I can see, unless anyone else has new information, I don't see any new things on Keith Williams, so maybe he will come over as well. And then the guy that I was mentioning, where was he? It was maybe Kevin Petrie, or maybe it was Jordan Traylor. It was Jordan Traylor, who was an offensive assistant. He was getting a chance to be the receivers coach at the Senior Bowl. So don't know if he's going to come over. Interesting name as an offensive assistant that could be related to offensive line coach. Jari Evans was an offensive assistant for the Saints last year. Curious what happens there. Clancy Barone was their tight ends coach, but I'm curious to see if they will stick with Mac Brown there. Other guys, Chucky Keaton was an offensive assistant here in Seattle. I'm really wondering about Frisman Jackson. I didn't sense that DK certainly didn't have necessarily the strongest reaction to him. Quishon Odom was an assistant quality control for the offensive line. Jake Peets is the guy that I'm wondering if he'll stick around. Obviously, Klint Kubiak and Jake Peets, well, did they overlap? No, they did not. So Jake Peets was with Sean McVay. Klint Kubiak was with Kyle Shanahan. I don't think that they've overlapped, but they may have. So I'd be curious to see if they stick around. Tyson Prince was the assistant wide receivers coach for the Seahawks. Kennedy Polamalu, running backs coach. The Saints running backs coach was Derek Foster. So I think we'll kind of find out what's going to happen there. But for the most part, it seems like I would think that this would clear the way for the Seahawks to have a press conference this week to introduce Klint Kubiak. As of now, I have not heard anything about the timing there. So if I do, I will let you all know. But as of now, I think they're getting closer and closer to having the information and the decisions done that they need to make in order to feel comfortable holding a press conference and handling questions from yours truly and everybody else. So people are saying Frisman Jackson is being retained. Is that something that was reported? I'm pulling this up just to see. Yes. Okay. Jeremy Fowler does say Seattle wide receiver coach Frisman Jackson will be retained. So that's interesting. Curious decision. But it is where they're going. So we'll see how DK and others feel about that. But that's good information. So thank you guys for clarifying that. All right. So I think it's a good news that you've got an offensive coordinator who's done the job, who's called plays, who's been in multiple different cities, and has kind of his guys. His offensive line, I think I've talked to you about it. Offensive line coach is the next most important coaching. It's actually probably a more important position on this particular staff than the defensive coordinator. No disrespect to Aden Dirty, but given that Mike Macdonald is calling plays, having somebody like an offensive line coach like John Benton is pretty critical. Somebody that really knows the system, knows how they want to run it, and knows how Klint Kubiak wants to do it. So there doesn't have to be any warm-up between Klint Kubiak and John Benton or Andrew Janocko. They know how they want things to work. As far as, looking at how did some of these teams do that John Benton coached from a run game perspective? So remember, 2017 to 2020, he was the offensive line coach. And let's take a look. So 2017, they were not great. 21st in rushing yards, 17th in yards per attempt. Now his running back then was Carlos Hyde, and Matt Breida. So keep that in mind. 2018, huge jump. They go up to 13th in rushing yards, 12th in yards per attempt. And for what it's worth, this was a lot of Nick Mullins as the quarterback at this point. And Matt Breida was their bell cow at running back, Alfred Morris. So they still didn't have great talent, but they did get better. 2019, that's when they jumped. Number 2 in the NFL in rushing yards, number 1 in rushing touchdowns, 9th in yards per attempt. By that point, they had Raheem Mostert taking on a lot of the runs. They also had a lot from Matt Breida and Tevin Coleman. So, a kind of a three-headed monster, but that was, and Deebo Samuel also started, but to get some carries, but only 14 that year. I think that was his rookie season. So that was 2019, and they were, again, number 2 in rushing in that year. And then 2020, his final year, they were 15th in rushing yards, 16th in yards per attempt. Jeff Wilson was their number 1 rusher, and then Raheem Mostert was number 2. So they didn't have the best rushing running backs during that period of time. I talked to you about some of the offensive linemen. Also, they got Trent Williams that in 2020, and so that was his last year. The running game did jump up the following year once they got Elijah Mitchell, and this was after Benton left. But worth just calling out that there was a progressive improvement over a couple of years for the time that John Benton was the coach at the 49ers, all the way up to number 2 in the NFL in rushing yards, and I think his 3rd season with the 49ers. The Jets, they had some success there as well. It's worth acknowledging, even though not necessarily the best offense, but from a rushing perspective, if we go back to 2021 and 2022. In 2021, the Jets were 27th in rushing yards, 13th in yards per attempt. They had Michael Carter as their main running back, so not great. But then the next season, 2022, believe this is when they had gotten Breece Hall. Yes, it's when they got Breece Hall, and Michael Carter still was getting a lot of carries. Their rushing game still was 25th and 24th in yards per attempt, so he wasn't able to make a big improvement with the Jets and did not last there. So not great. Probably worth going all the way back to the Texans, 2006 to 2013. I'm not going to do that because that's a Gary Kubiak thing. So I'm just a little bit curious whether or not any of the guys there were more influenced by Gary Kubiak than by John Benton. But if I at least look at who were on the roster at that time, let me look at the Texans roster depth chart at offensive line. And I'm going to go all the way back to 2006. Let's see if I can do that. And I'll let you know if there's anything interesting here. But I'm getting ad blocked right now. Sorry. So if I go all the way back, how far back does it go? It goes back to 2008, 2007. All right, let's just see way back then. Offensive linemen. So they did have Laramie Tunsil back then. Titus Howard. Oh wait, no. That's I was like, that doesn't make any sense. All right, we just pulled it up. Ephraim Salam, Chester Pitts. I remember Chester Pitts. Mike Flanagan was the center. Fred Weary, Eric Winston. I am a little bit not loving some of these indicators. A couple years later, so you do get to Dwayne Brown. So Dwayne Brown was during this time. Chris Myers was their center. So there were some steps forward there, and that was the Matt Schaub, era of the Texans. So there's some promise there, but I do care about who the offensive linemen were when the offensive line coach is around, especially over the following years, because they should have some influence on who's getting drafted. So, maybe he's part of how Dwayne Brown became who he is, and that's a pretty good thing. I see that there's a question from Nunya393. How do I gift memberships? So there should be 3 dots on the menu item, and you click on that, and then there's a ability to, I think, gift memberships, and you have to turn it on or something along those lines, and then you're able to do it. I think it also might be something that you need to do. I don't know if it works from all platforms, but I think generally it probably works best from Android or from a desktop. If you're on your iPhone, I'm not positive it works, but maybe someone else who's been gifting can let you know. Why is she asking? Well, because Italian Knight just gifted 20 Hawk Blogger memberships, and Bryce Coots just gifted 10 more. So thank you so much to Italian Knight, and thank you to Bryce for gifting these memberships. I love this group, this community, how generous everybody is. Everyone's trying to bring in more friendly folks. And one of the best ways to do that is to give them a free membership. And the way you get one is to be engaged, click subscribe, watch the show. The more that you participate, the more you have a chance to, get one of these free memberships. So, and if you get one of the free memberships, try to pay it forward. I always love to do that. And Nunya says that she will do it the next chance she's watching on a PC, stuck on an iPhone today. I think I just got confirmation that Scott Huff has been let go. Let me just double check. So it says from Bob Condata that he is reporting. Let me just double check that they are letting Scott Huff go. Let me double check that, and I will get back to you on that front. All right, so it says, okay, yes, Benton 61 will take the place of Scott Huff, who a source confirmed will not be retained. So Scott Huff will not be part of the coaching staff this year. So I really like getting to know Scott Huff. I thought he did a nice job with the guys that he brought in and started to actually show some progress with the young guys towards the end of the season. But it makes perfect sense to me that Klint Kubiak's, you don't want to leave anything to chance. You want to work with the guys that you already have a relationship with. You don't have to have any getting to know, feeling out periods. They're just going to know how they want it coached, how it's supposed to work, and whether guys are doing it or not. So I think that makes all the sense. So, all right. So that, I think, kind of catches folks up on the news. We are here 49 minutes into the show, and oh my God. There goes Italian Knight giving 50 Hawk Blogger memberships. Unbelievable. So grateful for your generosity. This is amazing. And what a great community we've got. So really, really appreciate it. Let's change gears and talk about Myles Garrett, because that's the other thing that I wanted to spend some time on. And if you didn't hear the news, you will. Myles Garrett, the best defensive player in the entire league, has requested a trade from the Cleveland Browns. He wants to play for a Super Bowl contender. He doesn't see that happening in Cleveland, and so he wants to play elsewhere. So what does that mean for Seattle? Does it mean anything for Seattle? So let's talk about this in a couple of different ways. First, what would it take to get Myles Garrett? I think you're probably talking about minimum a first-round pick and more. So minimum a first-round pick and more. I wouldn't be surprised if it's multiple firsts. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a first and a second, or a first and a third. Just really, it's going to be an expensive trade. What are you getting for that kind of ammunition? I mean, Myles Garrett is the best player, the best defensive player in the NFL. What are you getting if you get Myles Garrett? Well, keep in mind, Myles Garrett is 29 years old right now. He will turn 30. He just turned 29. He will turn 30 in January of 2026, or end of December 29th, 2025. Sorry. So end of this year, very end of this year, December 29th, he will turn 30 years old. So you are getting a 29-year-old who will turn 30, elite of elite edge rushers who can rush anywhere along the line. He has had at least 14 sacks in 4 straight seasons. He has had at least 12 sacks in 5 straight seasons and 6 out of the last 7. He has had at least double-digit sacks in 7 straight seasons. He has been an AP All-Pro first team in 4 of the last 5 years. He was a second team AP All-Pro in the one season he wasn't a first team. He was the Defensive Player of the Year in 2023, and is in the conversation for the Defensive Player of the Year every single year. He is somebody who is going to tackles for loss. He led the league in tackles for loss last year, so he's not just a pass rusher. He's an absolute game wrecker. An absolute game wrecker. Could the Seahawks use that? Yeah, of course they could use that. Of course they could use that. Every single team could use Myles Garrett. Now let's talk about whether it makes sense to give up what they'd ask. We're going to talk about whether this is realistic and all that in a second. If you told me that the Seahawks traded their first pick, 18th overall this year, and then you added, let's say, a 3rd round pick, I think that's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, I don't think that's what you could probably get away with, but this is, from a compensation trade-wise, the Seahawks aren't going to get a player that is anywhere close to Myles Garrett with the 18th pick. This is a down year in the draft for blue-chip players in general. The Seahawks should be completely open to giving up their first-round pick if that was something that they were really in conversation to bring in a Myles Garrett. But let's look at this a little bit more holistically. So, Myles Garrett, from his angle, why is he wanting to leave Cleveland? Because he wants to win a Super Bowl. If the Browns say they've come into an agreement with the Seahawks, is Myles Garrett going to look at Seattle and be like, cool, we're going to go compete for a Super Bowl? That's a tough sell. That's a tough sell. I don't think that Myles Garrett's going to look at that situation in Seattle and say they're a Myles Garrett away from a Super Bowl. Now, the other part of this is that the Seahawks, you could talk about cap space. I will tell you about that right now. Why not? So Myles Garrett is I think he's the 5th highest paid edge rusher in the NFL. Yes, 5th highest, right behind TJ Watt. Makes $25 million a year. He is under contract. he is under contract through 2026, so the next 2 seasons. Then he's got a bunch of void years on his deal. If the Browns trade him this year, they will actually lose $16 million in cap space. So I'm not sure if there's some sort of restructuring that would have to happen in order to reduce the cap loss for the Browns, but it's a pretty rough situation for them. They've already got the Deshaun Watson contract that's killing them, so this is going to be rough for them to get rid of him one way or another. The team that acquires Myles Garrett, at least if there's no change to the contract, he would count $19 million against the cap this year. Seahawks, as you know, have some work to do to create cap space. The cap space wouldn't be an issue, but here's the thing. Do you think the Seahawks would be a better team if they spent $20 million plus, let's say, a first and a third or a first and a second to get Myles Garrett, or $23 million a year to get Trey Smith? That's kind of a question here. For me, there's no question that Myles Garrett is a better player than Trey Smith and a more impactful overall player. But you're talking about Myles Garrett, who's 29, who plays on plays defense for a defense that already is pretty good. Now, I happen to think an edge rusher is the last missing piece to make this an elite defense, like a really dominant defense. So that's the pro side, but you're also talking about giving up draft capital and having the opportunity cost of not being able to sign a top free agent guard. Not that the Seahawks are certain to do that anyway, but from my perspective, I think that giving up the draft capital you need to and the cap and allocating the cap space to do this, if Myles Garrett was 26, I might be more tempted. But honestly, I think that it doesn't make a ton of sense for the Seahawks to make a move like this. I do think that the Seahawks have draft ammunition that they should be willing to give up. But the fact of the matter is, so do other teams. I think almost every team in this draft, I don't think that the Titans would give up Abdul Carter and the number 1 overall pick for Myles Garrett. But honestly, Abdul Carter's a good player. He's never going to be Myles Garrett. I just don't think the Titans are Myles Garrett away from doing this. So I just think, could it be something where the Seahawks trade DK Metcalf? DK Metcalf in a number 1, and that saves the cap space potentially. So maybe you could do Myles Garrett and Trey Smith. If you got into something like that, why the hell not? It's crazy to talk about, to be very honest. It's crazy to talk about. I don't see the Seahawks doing it. But if you told me that you could have Myles Garrett and Trey Smith, and the cost of that was your first round pick this year in DK Metcalf, and then probably maybe a third or a fourth or something like that, I think the Seahawks would be a significantly better team, right away, if you made a move like that. I think other guys that you could consider moving player-wise, that if Cleveland was interested in that, you've got some guys coming up on their rookie deal extension discussions. Do you move a Charles Cross? I don't think so, but you could consider doing that because it's a pretty tackle-heavy draft. I think that, again, that would mean that it depends on if you're still losing your first round pick, that would be a little rough. Do you move, Arik Woolen? Maybe that's more realistic as someone that you could see moving along to get someone like this. But if we're really looking at this realistically, I think Myles Garrett's going to say this and say, yeah, I don't think Seattle's the place I'm looking to go. I'm looking to go someplace maybe like Baltimore or Buffalo or someplace that is so close and they just need that player to get them over the top. I think that's where Myles Garrett is going to want to go. I wouldn't even be surprised if he looks at a team like Miami, where everybody wants to go play in Miami anyway, and says, yeah, maybe that's a place. I wouldn't be shocked if the Raiders and Pete Carroll and they go and say, yeah, let's go do it. If you go and you get Myles Garrett to pair with Max Crosby and you sign a Sam Darnold, and maybe you get some, it depends on what draft pick. If you give up the 6th pick in the draft to do that, I think that makes a bunch of sense for the Raiders to potentially think of something like this. And maybe that's something that Myles Garrett thinks is appealing. Now, I don't know that you could convince me that the Raiders are, Myles Garrett and Sam Darnold away from contending for a Super Bowl, but maybe that's something because of the Vegas aspect, because of Pete Carroll, there might be other things that get him interested in that. So, it's a pretty fascinating turn of events and not super shocking that Myles Garrett came to this conclusion, and good for him, man. I mean, Cleveland's been an absolute shit show. I feel for that city who's just been raked through the coals and had really bad decisions made over and over and over again. It's a shame. It really, really is. I'm going to keep an eye on that one for sure. And while I was talking, Bryce Coos just keeps going. 20, 30 more Hawk Blogger memberships. So that is, if I count up, that's 30, 40, 50 Hawk Blogger memberships just in this show alone. Italian Nights giving away 70 Hawk Blogger memberships in this show alone. And then Chris Clark giving away another 5. So that's a lot of Hawk Blogger memberships available for folks to take advantage of. So hopefully we got a bunch of new people jumping on board, being part of the crew. So really appreciate it. You can also upgrade those to get access to my Senior Bowl footage. 40 minutes of 1v1 drills are up there, as well as another 15 minutes of I think it's like 17 minutes of defensive line drills that I think are great to watch. And this is, it keeps coming. This is great. And people say, is this paying for Jeff to go to the combine? It might. We got to still get our combine credentials, but Italian Night, he just did it again. Another 50. So over 120 Hawk Blogger memberships from Italian Night. Another 5 from P. Jeezy, who's been doing it for a while now as well. I'm going to make the whole show just shouting out these gifts. It's amazing, folks. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you all for the support. So thanks for tuning in as well. So yeah, let's kind of recap what we got for the day. So Seahawks have got their new offensive line coach in John Benton. They've got their new quarterbacks coach in Andrew Janocko. Both those guys have previous history with Klint Kubiak. I think we're narrowing in on being able to have the press conference where he gets introduced and we get to ask him some questions. We know Scott Huff has been let go. Charles London has already left as quarterbacks coach. So we're waiting to get word on some of the other coaches and finalization there. I think we should get that within the next day or two. And then maybe today, the way things are rolling. And then the other big news is Myles Garrett has requested a trade. And the reality is, even if the Seahawks are interested, not sure that Myles Garrett is going to want to come to Seattle, because the reason that he's requested a trade is that he wants to play for a Super Bowl. And I just don't know that you can credibly make the case right now that the Seahawks are a Myles Garrett away from a Super Bowl contender status. And we're going to have to see where that goes, but it's going to be a huge shift. Does a team like the 49ers, I mean, do they trade the 11th overall pick to get Myles Garrett? I think that's a legitimate question. A team like the Rams, I don't know that they need an edge rusher given what they've got, but they've shown time and again that they are willing to trade first-round picks away for blue-chip players. Myles Garrett's a blue-chip player. So those are two names that within the division. The Arizona Cardinals, I don't think that they are Myles Garrett away, but they should absolutely. They need him more than anybody else, and they should be making a push. So I think all the three teams in the Seahawks division probably have a better track record of either a track record or a reason to make this move than the Seahawks. So I don't think it is likely, but keep an eye out. Keep an eye out on what happens. Let's hope that he ends up in the AFC or stays in the AFC somewhere if he's not coming to Seattle. Folks, thank you so much for all the generosity today, especially to Italian Knight and Bryce Coots, but really everybody, PGZ and Chris Clark and everybody else who has been so generous today. Really, really appreciate it. I will be back with you tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be fun. It's going to be a 7 a.m. show. At 7:30, Dane Brugler will join us for the first time for one of his sessions talking about the draft and about Senior Bowl and the prospects and what he saw. That's been made possible by Old School Seahawk, who became, upgraded his memberships and made it possible for me to bring someone like Dane Brugler aboard. So head on over to patreon.com, become a member there. Various levels of support you can sign up for. All that's greatly appreciated. Until I see you next time, folks, and unless more news comes out, I'm Brian Nemhauser. This has been episode 315 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Have a great rest of your day.